AFC East action in Week 18. One team mercifully seeing its season come to an end. Another team hoping this is not the end. Let's break it down on today's Locked On NFL crossover show.
You are Locked On NFL crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Dolphins fans and Jets fans. It's Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, alongside Kyle Krabs, my friend, the host of Locked On Dolphins, here to preview the regular season finale, Week 18, the Jets and the Dolphins at MetLife Stadium. This episode, like all Crossover Thursday episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network, is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, Kyle, great to speak with you again, our second crossover show of the year. For Jets fans, this is the moment we've been waiting for quite a while. The highlight of the season will be the end. It's been a nightmare season for this team. I know the Dolphins still alive in the playoff race, but I get the sense talking with you before we started recording that you're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, the psychology was, hey, let's make a little run here and see what happens. And then the news popped up at the end of last week that Tua Tagovailoa is dealing with a hip injury and ailment, and it's not related to the one that he had in college. But nevertheless, they downgraded him from questionable to doubtful, and then he doesn't start the game against Cleveland after spending 4 games on injured reserve with a concussion and obviously his well-documented concussion history. So for a season that has been every twist and turn that you could possibly imagine, 2-6 to 8-8 and going 6-2 over your last 8 games. You can't have nice things as a Dolphins fan. And I know Jets fans, we're kindred spirits in that regard. Oh, you're going to get back to 500, but Tua's not going to be able to go. And we don't know if he's going to be able to play in Week 18. So just the latest cherry on top on what has been just a Murphy's Law type of season. And it really is. I chuckled about it with you in the pre-show about being mathematically alive for the playoffs and really not that outrageous of a possibility when you look at they need Denver to lose to the Chiefs, who I know won't be playing some of their starters, and if the Dolphins win this game.
All right, so let's talk about the whole Tua situation. So what's going to happen this week at quarterback for the Dolphins if he's not ready to go?
If he's not ready to go, it'll be Tyler Huntley, who started the game against the Browns. And for the first time in 3 years of Mike McDaniel football, I felt like he pushed the right buttons to tweak and adjust how they played offense to accommodate a backup. So much of the identity of the Dolphins passing offense is the timing and hitting guys in stride and tight window throws and anticipating areas of the field to hit guys in stride. And that's why teams that have been able to really disrupt those 2 wide receivers have had so much success in kind of disrupting the operation of the offense. And they ran less of that, and they ran more isolation routes and deep hooks off of play action passing that pulls that linebacker up. And because it wasn't Tua, the Browns were a little bit more content to play a single high safety and load the box to try to stop the run. So you had the space on the perimeter to do so. And Tyler Huntley did a great job in his own right. And the way that he executed wasn't the same style of play, but it was very efficient. He was confident. And I think it was because they called a game from a passing game perspective that was more of these isolation routes. And then there were a couple of core concepts that have been core concepts for several years of Miami that you could tell he really worked on since the last time that the Dolphins had to play him, which was against the Indianapolis Colts earlier in the season.
So let me ask this. As you mentioned, it's been a roller coaster season for the Dolphins, which is different from the Jets, where it's just been roller coasters up and down. There have been ups. The Jets have just been like a straight I don't know if you ever been
off the edge.
yeah, just like riding the boat off the waterfall. But what's gone right when the Dolphins have played well, and what's gone wrong when they haven't? Is it as simple as Tua is in there, the team looks good? When he's out, you're playing the backup quarterback and things aren't going quite as well? Or are there deeper things to look for?
So I think you can split the weight of responsibility of this across a number of different parties. And that's why I think that it's such a contentious climate around the team right now as far as the fan base and what changes they want to be seen made, because the team ideology is they want to invest in tackles and center for the wide zone system, but they really treat the guard like a secondary position, and it's been crippling to their ability to consistently run the football. So that element of it, even when Tua came back and Austin Jackson suffered a season-ending injury against Buffalo in Week 9, they have not really, with the exception of the San Francisco game, been able to run the ball with any level of consistency whatsoever. And it turns it into, okay, well, now we got to pass 42 times. And a lot of these are going to be screen passes, which are effectively glorified extensions of the outside zone running offense anyway. And before this game against the Browns, none of the backup quarterbacks showed the ability to do that. And the offense is so darn complex that when it's not Tua that's back there, guys are lining up wrong, and there's procedural issues. And you still saw some of that, but I think you saw Miami, they dumbed some of that down where they went a little bit more tempo and no huddle at times to get up to the line of scrimmage more quickly. So there was less bells and whistles on some of their things. So like the weight of that goes to Mike McDaniel. The weight of the philosophy goes, Mike McDaniel brought that from San Francisco, but the general manager was the person who put the team together and collected that. And then I think they were really complacent with the backup quarterback situation in general coming into the year. Tyler Huntley wasn't on the roster until after Tua suffered his concussion against Buffalo. So I think you can look at offensive line play. I think you can look at having a competent backup quarterback, but not having him on the roster when the season started, and you had to onboard him, and he kind of had to play on the fly in the first month of the season. And I think you can look at Mike McDaniel and some of his tendencies as a coach, and all of those things pouring into each other have been what has compounded when it doesn't go well. That's usually a big part of the reason why.
How are the Dolphins looking on defense the last couple of weeks?
They've looked solid, and it's been surprising because they frankly turned down the chance to get Shaq Barrett back after he retired before training camp, and then decided he wanted to come back, but he didn't really talk to the team, and the team mulled it over for a few days and said, thanks, but no thanks. We really only have one functional pass rusher in Chop Robinson anyway. And then they had an opportunity to activate Bradley Chubb off the PUP list, and he practiced for 21 days, and they said, thanks, but no thanks. Get ready for next year. And the fact that, with Chop Robinson, who is their first round pick and leads the team for players on the edge in sacks, Zach Sealer on the inside, that defense has been able to navigate limited, consistent pressure. And I thought that was one of the storylines of the first time these two teams played was Rodgers, and he got the ball out quick, but they really had limited opportunities. The one sack that they had was on an extended play where Aaron's all the way out on the sideline and Jordan Brooks goes flying by, and then he has to run back inbounds to tackle him because they don't get him to the ground. They haven't had a very complimentary rush group with just one guy on the edge that's been consistent, but they have done a very good job of defending the run. They structurally are pretty sound in that regard. And they've started to pick it up with turnovers, where they have 4 turnovers in the last 3 games defensively. And that had been one of the big sore spots for them earlier in the season.
My last question for you. There are some rumblings potentially about Mike McDaniel's job status. I'm just interested to hear your perspective. Do you expect McDaniel's going to be back in 2025?
I expect Mike will be back. And a big part of the evidence as to why is the team has played strong for Mike after a 2-6 start. 6-2 with a chance to go 7-2. And after the San Francisco win, which I think a lot of Dolphins fans read into the wrong way in some regard, but they released a video of the locker room and Mike giving out game balls. And the owner, Steve Ross, came down and he gave Mike McDaniel a game ball after the players got their game balls after the San Francisco win. And a big part of that was obviously Kyle Shanahan was his mentor. San Francisco was his old team. He got his first win against that. A lot of people read into that and said, oh, Ross giving McDaniel a game ball is him effectively saying your job is safe. I didn't read into it that way, but I do have the same conclusion. Now, I do think the Dolphins are a team that may be making some hierarchy changes. General manager Chris Greer has had the title since 2016. He's been the unquestioned authority in the roster construction since 2019. And the shortcomings this year, a lot of them, I think you can draw back to personnel decisions, even though they've pushed a lot of right buttons. They push some wrong buttons as well, and it looms as a potential threat to keep Miami out of the postseason.
All right. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for that information.
Yeah.
Feel like really up to date on the Dolphins now. Ahead here on our crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Dolphins, we're going to flip the script. Kyle will ask me about all the happenings with the New York Jets. To say it's been an eventful season in New York it would be an understatement. We'll get to all that continuing here on our crossover Thursday show. This crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. You know, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories of 2024 was going to a Jets game right after Thanksgiving. I went to a game where the Jets played the Seahawks, and even though the Jets were out of the race, I had a really good time. Went with my dad. Well, now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Jets fans, I don't need to tell you this, but Kyle and Dolphins fans, I'll tell you something. There are going to be plenty of seats available for this game. Jets fans were completely checked out. Game the Jets played against the Rams a couple weeks ago. The stadium was not even close to being full. It'd be great deals to be had if you want to head out to MetLife Stadium on Sunday. And Gametime is the place to get in on the action. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKDOWNNFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, alongside my colleague Kyle Krabs, the host of Locked On Dolphins. Kyle, I don't even know where to begin with this Jet season. I think the best thing anybody can say about it is that it will end Sunday. But I'm happy to answer any questions you got.
And I guess for my perspective, because you know the Jets' fate has kind of been known for a couple of months now for this season. I'm curious your perspective on a lot of the big decisions that this team will be making in the weeks ahead. When you consider they're well established with a general manager and a head coaching vacancy. I know they've already started some of the interviews for coaches. We're hearing Rex Ryan communicating that he's expecting to get an interview. I've heard Mike Vrabel's name from a lot of Jets fans as far as being a hot name that they're particularly interested in. Ben Johnson has been the belle of the ball. Like, what do you gauge the psyche is of this team as they look to come into the next version of themselves with these decisions?
Well, you can never rule anything out with the Jets. It's one thing I've learned through the years. So I can't tell you definitively that Rex Ryan is not going to be a serious candidate. But at this point, I don't have a ton to make me believe that he's got a good shot at getting the job. He made a comment the other day that he's planning to speak with the Jets after the season. I don't know whether that means he actually has an interview scheduled or whether it means he's just going to ask them to hire him. That's not really clear. I think we can rule Ben Johnson out. Ben Johnson a year ago was probably the hottest candidate, and he decided, you know what, I don't like any of these situations, so I'm going to go back to Detroit for another year. I like where I'm at with the Lions, and I do think Ben Johnson is going to take a head coaching job this cycle, but I don't think he's been waiting all this time to go work for the Jets and throw himself into this situation in this city with this group of media and this owner. Vrabel's more interested. There is a lot of smoke around Vrabel potentially being interested. There have been a few media reports that even though Bill Belichick, and this has been well known, Bill Belichick does not respect the Jets franchise. There was some crazy report a few weeks back that he reached out to the team. Mm-hmm. That seems like it was due diligence if it was anything. And Belichick has always discouraged his proteges from going to the Jets, but there have been reports that Vrabel is not going to rule the Jets out just because Belichick doesn't like them. There's also a report, this is from Colin Cowherd, so take it for what it's worth, but Colin Cowherd claimed a few weeks back that Vrabel told him that he'd be interested in the Jets job depending on who the GM is. But I think for me, the biggest thing is they have to find a head coach and a general manager who are on the same page for a couple of reasons. Number one is that the Jets have frequently just paired guys together without getting a sense of whether they share the same philosophies, with a sense of whether they want to do the same things. I will say that I do, for the issues Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh had, I do not think that was an issue. I think that they were both on the same page. I think that they worked well together. They made a lot of mistakes, and the Jets' overall dysfunction kind of submerged them. But it's been true in the past, whether it was Todd Bowles and Mike McCagnon or John Dick and Rex Ryan. the Jets frequently pair guys who don't share a similar philosophy, and that creates all kinds of tension. It prevents them from working well together. The other aspect of this is the owner is, for lack of a better word, terrible. And one of the things the owner always does is I say he divides and conquers. He has two guys who don't work well together, so then he becomes the decider. And this is an owner who has been a terrible decider, an owner who really 25 years into his tenure running this team doesn't seem to know the first thing about how to build a winning culture. So with all that said, I mean, I think Vrabel's the guy I lean towards, not because I think Mike Vrabel is Vince Lombardi, not because I think he's Bill Parcells, but Vrabel to me seems like the one candidate out there who has the track record where he can come in and say, we're running things my way. He can bring in, he can bring in his own guy as GM, and the organization, the football people can speak with one voice and hopefully keep ownership out of major decisions.
So as we look at the roster, obviously the top down needing to make those decisions, but the decisions those people will make with Aaron Rodgers, with some of the discontent we're hearing from potentially Garrett Wilson. You have Davante Adams as a player that was brought in. What's the gauge on the direction of, like, how hard is the reset? Obviously, there's a lot of young talent that's been established, courtesy of a couple of impactful draft classes that Joe Douglas had, and that's a nice nucleus for a launch point for the next group. But what's the vibe on a lot of the well-established, like, big names that are on this roster that were brought in to try to jumpstart this thing that it unfortunately didn't happen?
At this point, I think it would be a shock to see Rodgers back. There have been all sorts of reports about how Woody Johnson, who was Rodgers' biggest booster for the first year he was here, Woody Johnson soured on him, as Woody Johnson does, because this is an owner who always needs a scapegoat for his problems. That's not to say Rodgers has been effective enough. He has not played well enough for this team. Rodgers has also kind of taken made passive-aggressive comments about the team and its ownership on his weekly McAfee show segments, as Rodgers is known to do. So it seems like this is heading for a divorce, and it really needs to. Rodgers has not delivered the way Jets fans were hoping, or the team was hoping he would. He looks very much like the 41-year-old quarterback that he is through much of the season, which it may be difficult for Dolphins fans, because the one good game Rodgers played this year, I thought his best performance was against the Miami Dolphins. So the guy you saw a few weeks ago has not been the guy we've seen for most of the season. He's been dealing with injuries. He really hasn't been very mobile. He's been hesitant to throw the ball down the field. I think they need to move on from Rodgers, and that means that they'll move on from Davante Adams. Davante Adams is tricky because he's still playing at a really high level. The problem is he's just not a player who ever made sense for this team. He just turned 32 on Christmas Eve. He has a bad contract. The Jets traded for him at a point where they were 2-4, and the season was pretty, the season may not have been over, but it was going to be a really long trek to get back into contention. He's going to go somewhere next year and help a team, but I just don't think he can be back, and I don't think he's going to want to be back without Rodgers. In fact, and the Jets, in their infinite wisdom, did not resolve his contract situation, which is tricky for next year, because currently he's slated to account $38 million against the cap. And that essentially means he controls his own destiny, because if he doesn't want to renegotiate, he can force the Jets to cut him, and he can go wherever he wants. And he'll go to a team. Look, he'll go to a contender and really help them, because he's still playing at a really high level. Garrett Wilson's the tricky one, because there's all sorts. Garrett Wilson hasn't explicitly said anything, but the old expression, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a lot of smoke about Garrett Wilson. You hear all this stuff. All these people around Garrett Wilson. A lot of reports that Garrett Wilson's unhappy. The question is, is this the type of thing where a big contract, because now he's eligible after the season, he's eligible to sign a contract extension. Sometimes a big contract soothes everything, but he's also a guy who's been on a losing team for 3 years. He's got 3,000-yard seasons despite not having quarterback play that's been good enough. There are a lot of questions around the draft class of 2022, where the Jets hit it out of the park in the 2022 draft. Not only did they pick Garrett Wilson, they picked Sauce Gardner, they picked Breece Hall, they picked Jermaine Johnson, who's been injured this year. They're coming close to contract time. As you mentioned, there is a base of talent here entering its prime. This is not like the situation the Jets had in 2020 with Adam Gase, where there was nothing on the roster. this can actually be turned around pretty quickly if the Jets get the right people in place. But there are challenges, so I think Rodgers and Adams are definitely gone. I think the real challenge for this team is figuring out how to maneuver and keep this 2022 draft class in place. All right. Well, you've heard about the Dolphins. You've heard about the Jets. Jets fans, there is a game this weekend. And it's important for the Dolphins because the Dolphins are still in the playoff race. And you're on our crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Dolphins. We'll talk keys to victory. Episode of Locked On Jets and Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here. They certainly won't feature the Jets, but they may feature the Dolphins. And it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You may love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It can be thrilling. And the Dolphins are favored in this game at MetLife Stadium. No shock about that. Dolphins fans, if you want to celebrate a playoff appearance and make some money, or Jets fans, if you think the Jets, for whatever reason, are going to win this game, FanDuel, again, is the place to get in on the action because, again, you get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, alongside Kyle Krabs, the host of Locked On Dolphins. Kyle, Dolphins have a chance to make the playoffs in this game. An incredibly turbulent season. Well, you can go first. What are your keys to victory for Miami?
I think the first thing they need to do a better job of this time around when they play the Jets is pressuring Aaron Rodgers. And that is in large part because the Dolphins are probably going to be without Kendall Fuller, their second corner. And that gets into some matchup potential with a veteran quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who he's always been aggressive. He's always got up to the line of scrimmage and seen a matchup that he likes and is not afraid to take shots down the field. And, Jalen Ramsey had his hands full with Garrett Wilson the first time these two teams played. And then if you don't have Kendall Fuller and it's Kader Kohu or it's Storm Duck, if you're an 11 personnel as the other outside corner that's getting matched with Devontae Adams, I don't like that matchup, just to be completely transparent. So, and I know Aaron is out there hunting for TD pass number 500. So he's going to be slinging it. So I think for Miami, getting after particularly the offensive tackles, and I know that's a spot for the Jets that's banged up with Tyron Smith and Olu Fashanu and Morgan Moses, I know is banged up and trying to play. I don't know if he's going to try to play this week or not. I know we're recording a little early in the week, but that for me is one of the big primary keys to victories. Don't let Aaron get up to the line of scrimmage, see matchups that he likes, and then also simultaneously have time to set up at the top of the drop to take those shots down the field, because that is where I think there's a lot of potential for chunk plays, either with completed passes or penalties down the field.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, I do think about the first game these teams played this year was one of the Jets' best offensive performances of the year. It's one of the first times they moved the ball. For me, I think a lot of this comes down to how badly the Jets want to play this game, because we did not see a team week 17 against Buffalo that looked all that interested in competing. This was a team, and I think there have been a lot of frustrating things about this season from a Jets fan perspective. But one of the things that's most frustrating to me is how frequently this team just loses its competitive fire when something goes wrong during a game. It happened, go back to week 7 against Pittsburgh. Jets played a great first 29 minutes of that game. Right before halftime, Aaron Rodgers throws an interception, and I think it just snowballed from there. And by the time the Steelers were running out the clock on their last drive, Jets knew they were running the ball, and the Steelers still were able to run it successfully. I mean, I think, I'm very hesitant to call out players for effort level because, I'm not on the field, but in that situation, it just looked like the Jets gave up. I think the same thing was true a few weeks later when the Jets played in Arizona against the Cardinals. There was just a total no-show. Things snowballed on them, and they're just little things like, one guy's making a tackle, the second and third guys aren't going in to help him. Last week against Buffalo, that game completely snowballed on them. There's one play that was very symbolic for me. There was a fumble by Garrett Wilson. It was an ugly play overall. It was a screenplay that was very poorly designed. There was really no way for Max Mitchell to hit his block that Garrett Wilson needed to spring him. Wilson fumbles the ball, but Aaron Rodgers was near the ball, and I don't know if you saw the play, but essentially he did like a little dive away from the ball. He did like a little thing. He dove to make it look like he was trying to get the ball, but he wasn't really trying to get the ball. And that's not to call Aaron out. That's just a kind of a symbolic thing. I said on Monday's episode that when I think back to the 2024 Jets, that might be the play that I remember because it just really sums up a lot of what's happened this season. I mean, look, the Jets have had a lot of issues. They've had the coaching has not been up to par. The decision in season to fire the coach, despite Robert Saleh's shortcomings, was not a good decision. The team has really fallen apart since Saleh was fired. Jets have dealt with injuries. You can't deal with that. Jets have dealt with players who formerly were great, aging, like Tyron Smith. There's only so much you can do about things like that. One thing you can control is your compete level. Last week against Buffalo, I did not see a high compete level from this team. So as much as anything, it's going to be a question of, how badly do the Jets want to be in this game? How badly do they want to end the season with a win? Because I think everything really starts there. This is these situations are always a bit tricky. On the road, Week 18 divisional game, a playoff spot potentially on the line. You see weird results in games like this sometimes. The question is, will the Jets show up and play hard? And that's the question. Will this be what they call a U-Haul game, where the Jets players have already loaded up, getting ready to get out of town. They've loaded up the U-Hauls with all the furniture, and they're just waiting for Monday. I think that's an open question.
Yeah, I reflect back on specifically the last 10 years of Dolphins football, and that's why I don't think any Dolphins fan, regardless of how bad the season's been for New York, feels good about this game, because you can go back to 2013 when this team was 8-6 and had games against teams with losing records in Buffalo and the New York Jets, and they lost them both and scored 7 points in those two games combined. The following year in 2014, they were 8-7 and lost at home to the Jets to finish 8-8 and lose the potential for a winning season. And you go to 2017 with Adam Gase, and they were 6-7 with 3 to go, and they played the Bills twice and lost both games. 2018, they had the Miami Miracle. They beat the Patriots to go to 7-6. And they go Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Buffalo. And those were not good teams, or the Jacksonville team in particular was 5-11. That was a bad team. And they laid down and they didn't show up. They had 183 yards of offense in that game. And then they had 4 turnovers in week 17 against the Bills and lost that game 42-17. So it's just the last 10 years, regardless of where Miami's at and playoff potential and winning records, it doesn't matter who they play. There's been about every other year, there's been one of these just total letdown performances. And I think that lingers in the back of Miami fans' minds coming into this game because, as you said, for as much as gone wrong for the Jets this season, who'd they have their best offensive performance of the year against? It was the Dolphins. So that's there's a lot of anxiety, I think, for Dolphins fans coming into a game like this, regardless of the vibes for both teams.
The person to be who always needs to make a joke. I shouldn't say this because it's been bad enough season for the Jets fans. I don't need to bring back bad memories, but the Jets saw that 2018 finish from the Dolphins, said, "We want that coach. That's our guy." that was the offseason where the Jets hired Adam Gase. Well, Kyle, always great chatting with you. I'm sure we'll chat in the offseason when we do AFC East shows. It's not been a great season for the Jets, but it's been a great season chatting with all of my colleagues here on Locked On, especially my friends at the AFC East. So, if you guys do win and make the playoffs, good luck the rest of the way.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
And Jets fans and Dolphins fans, tune in tomorrow. I'll continue previewing the game on Locked On Jets. Kyle will continue previewing the game on Locked On Dolphins. We know it's the last game of the season for the Jets fans. Will it be the last game of the season for Dolphins fans? We'll find out. We'll chat on Friday. Take care, everybody.